Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Kokoros Facts History, the rise and fall of Khaddik Khan. Khaddik was the son of an orc warlord. He was raised with brutality and a fierce hatred of the rest of the world, even for other orc tribes. As Khaddik grew older, he learned of the ways of Gruumsh. He thought of a different path. Orcs believed the strongest would lead them, but war against each other to prove who is stronger. This did not fit with taking back the world that rightfully belonged to them. Before the orcs were banished to the dark swamps of Garhar, a land with few resources, Khaddik sought out shamans and wise men to learn the way to unite the tribes. Together with his shaman companion Dregus and ranger companion Ravdak, along with two kobolds, Crepperlippin the warrior and Scab the thief, they set out on a quest to discover what was needed to become the most powerful orc and unite his people. Over time, they learned of a few artifacts, mainly the Spear of Gruumsh and Vargarhos, the double axe of wounding. These, along with an ancient ritual to transform Khaddik Khan into a true warrior connected with Gruumsh. Dregus took the Spear of Gruumsh and enchanted a dagger, and carved out sigils in small stones, and placed them in a sacred spell circle. With Dregus presiding over the ritual, Khaddik Khan began to cut out his left eye as magic surged through his body, making him the first Eye of Gruumsh in over 1,000 years. With his team by his side, his weapon, his skill, and his divine connection to his deity, he was unrivaled as a warrior. He vanquished all those who doubted him. Once the orcs were united, Khaddik and his army set out east over the shining mountains, taking fortified mountain passes, overwhelming the dwarves of the area. They conquered part of Mania, but continued west, his first real goal, conquering the Grey Elves of the Mithril Forest, they who saw themselves so intelligent and better than all others. They figured the orcs as raiders. This was their tactic. Send in a small scouting party to assess the enemy, send in raiders to lure them out. Then when the guard is down, send in the main army. They moved through the forest that was once thought of as impenetrable. They took over elf city by elf city, leaving destruction in their wake. They took the elves as slaves to make magic weapons, items, and armor for them, to build sturdier carts and supply the huge train of warfare. Once the Mithril Forest was conquered, he made a deal with the Yak folk of the Kurthan Steppes by convincing their warlord Hojin Lee to join his army, and his people would not be enslaved. He also made a deal with Varungar, the Durgar king, to help take out the rest of the dwarves of the Shining Mountains. The deal was for the orcs to wipe out the only real threat to the Durgar, the Maenads. The result is known as the Maenad Genocide, and their lands were burnt and salted until Mania was little more than a wasteland. With the Yak folk setting their sights on western Nijan, the Durgar attacking the dwarves of the Shining Mountains, Khaddik Khan turned west to Rusklin. He decimated villages in the eastern part of the country for a few weeks, but then the real battle came at Alden. The guards and militia were ready for an attack as word had spread that orc raiders were ravaging nearby villages. They didn't think a band of raiders would attack, let alone take a walled city like Alden. But as the guards in the distance watchtowers blew their horns, the guards on the walls did not expect to see what appeared over the distant hill. An entire army of orcs, outnumbering the city defenses 5-1. They were overwhelmed and retreated, and the orcs had their first occupied human city. They did not pause, however. They left some occupants to occupy the city and kept moving. Rusklin pleaded with other nations, but none of them could believe such an orc threat and passed it off as exaggeration. Rusklin was on their own, and in less than time than could be fathomed, the orcs sacked Eborn, the capital city, and the rest of Rusklin was gobbled up with ease as refugees fled the country for fear of dying or worse, enslavement. In Eborn, Khaddik Khan consolidated his seat of power and made it the capital of his new empire. Before seeking out elf lands to the southwest, he made a deal with Kurgan Thok, matron mother of the Drow, to help them further grow his army. It was about this time that Khaddik Khan was approached by his top general, the Ranger Ravdak. Ravdak accused Khaddik of no longer doing the will of Grumsh, but expanding for his personal gain. Khaddik, being in a drunken state at the time, grew angry at his friend's accusations and discontent with all the alliances with other races and putting their leaders in prominent positions of power within the empire. Khaddik could take no more, and this took the spear of Grumsh from Dregas and threw it angrily at Ravdak, killing him. Khaddik was burdened by the loss of his friend, and started questioning himself about his own motives. After taking much of the Elflands to the west and south, he annexed Genoa into the empire, as it had no real permanent inhabitants of any power or government. He then realized the windswept mountains were more treacherous than the Shining Mountains, and could not cross them to get to the High Elves and the humans of the west. He sought out shipwrights and carpenters of Rusklin to repair and build ships for the orcs. First the orcs went northwest, across the North Ocean, to get to Northland. The way, however, was blocked off by icebergs that closed the channel between the windswept mountains and the Great Glacier. Then he set in a new direction, south. Saxland stood between him and the Aronian Sea, and the rest of the world. Saxland proved to be a difficult enemy. Many refugees from Rusklin spread the tales of the orcs, and King Reginald Battlemore prepared the country's troops for war. The orcs conquered some of Saxland, but the forces of Saxland dug into the ground and separated Khaddik from taking Orberg and having access to the Aronian Sea. Then started the bloody trench war between Saxland and the Orc Empire. Next, Khaddik Khan made another deal, this time with the tiefling assassin Zirdra Na, to create and govern a new faction of the Empire, the League of the One Eye, a secret organization dedicated to treachery and gathering information, a network of spies and assassins from the underbelly of the world to deal with the nuisances of West Nijan and Saxland. Khaddik Khan's army was having a hard time conquering West Nijan, although seizing 2/3 of it. The Emperor was fighting on two fronts. After 20 years of constant warfare, the orcs began to lose morale. There was more resistance than in the early days, and rebellion were often, although easily, quelled. Then came his plan, to split Saxland in two, and make them fight on two fronts. Rutherford is a city in western Saxland, an important trade center. If he were to plant a division of the League of the One Eye in the city and tear it apart from the inside out, then, once the city was taken, Kurgan Thok could place a teleportation circle in the city and send an army to fight Orberg from the west. Around the same time, a cleric from Rusklin had gathered intel on Khaddik Khan's plan to seek out more artifacts and grow his power further. This man was named Rainier. He gathered a small army of adventurers and young men who had not yet gone to war. Rainier tracked Khaddik Khan, but early on, Khaddik ordered Zirdra Na herself to infiltrate and find out what Rainier was up to. Eventually, Zirdra Na gathered all she needed to know and was ordered to assassinate Rainier. However, Rainier's men intervened and Zirdra Na escaped, the assassination attempt having failed. Rainier and his group, called Rainier's Chosen, delved into the Underdark in an attempt to evade the orc armies, fighting against Saxland. His destination was the Ruby Temple, deep in the windswept mountains. A place whose mages could locate anything, even Khaddik Khan. As Khaddik learned of this place, he too thought it would be useful, so he gathered his generals to personally handle Rainier and his Chosen. Khaddik got to the Ruby Temple just 2 days before Rainier. First, Khaddik tried to bargain with the mages, but they proved to be difficult. He gathered basilisks trained by the Duergar to deal with the mages. Then they would lay in wait for Rainier's Chosen. Rainier and his party arrived and found the mages frozen in stone. They went into the main divination chamber and were confronted by Khaddik Khan himself and his generals. The fight lasted only a few minutes. Rainier's Chosen proving themselves able combatants, however, they may have been underestimated by the one-eyed orc and his generals. Khaddik Khan was fighting Rainier one-on-one while his generals fought the ragtag group. Many of Rainier's Chosen had fallen throughout their journey, but this was a major defeat. Before the last of his men fell, Rainier and Khaddik were fighting high on a precipice, but the Khan's weapons proved more powerful than Rainier's, and the cleric fell at the hands of Khaddik Khan. Instead of finishing the enemy off, Khaddik ordered his men to leave them to die. Some did, but others recovered. Jaster, the commander of Rainier's troops, paladin of St. Cuthbert, could not heal Rainier from the wounds of Vargarhas, Khaddik's double axe of wounding. Rainier revealed to Jaster that Jaster was in fact an Aasimar, a rare race descended from angels and the best hope humanity has to defeating Khaddik Khan. Rainier died and his chosen could not revive him. Khaddik was unable to utilize the Ruby Temple and left. Jaster took up the mantle of general of Rainier's chosen and spent a year getting stronger until he and his crew tracked Khaddik Khan back to his capital of Eborn. Along the way, they defeated the Emperor's generals one by one until only Khaddik and Dregas remained. Around the same time, Rutherford in the west had been taken over by the League of the One Eye, specifically two masterminds by the titles of the Fiendish Jester and the Infernal Terror. They were rivaled by the Heroes of Rutherford, a band of adventurers employed by the city's Lord William Blackwolf. They gathered troops from Northland, the Isle de Gaul, the West Isles, and Turkland, as well as elves and dwarves. They even had a battalion of Fae and another of devils disguised as militiamen. The city was rife with battle, and the Heroes of Rutherford, having amassed an arsenal of legendary items, were poised to attack the heart of the League of the One Eye, sequestered in the city keep. The battle was fierce, but before the heroes could vanquish the Infernal Terror, he released their secret weapon, the Orb of Elemental Dragons. What happened next is known as the Great Calamity. With Rutherford back in the hands of the humans, and his top generals defeated, Khaddik grew increasingly isolated. He would see no one but Dregas, not even his 5 sons, one of which was able to supplant the Sultan of Turkland while he was away helping Rutherford, this being his youngest son, the half-orc Talazar. His sons abandoned him, and he was open for attack. Jaster and Rainier's chosen snuck through the sewers of the city to an entrance below the castle, where Khaddik and Dregas were. They stormed the castle and defeated the Emperor's elite guard, confronting him and Dregas. As the Khan was about to be defeated, he pled to the wounded, loyal Dregas to heal him, but Dregas chose to heal himself and attempt to flee. Jaster smote Khaddik Khan with his magical longsword, Arcadia's Judgment, breaking Vargarhas in 2. Dregas was hunted down and killed. Although victory seemed at hand, the orcs of the city of Eborn, led by Khaddik Khan's oldest son Garvok, took back the city, and it is unknown what happened to Jaster and the rest of Rainier's chosen. The heroes of Rutherford were given honors and titles by King Battlemore, and that is the end of Khaddik Khan.